Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, which is why attendees do what they do, the psychology behind exceptional experiences. And if only we knew why attendees do what they do, maybe today we will find out a little bit of that. I'm Vanessa Lovatt, the founder of Event Tech World and your host for today. And today's webinar is brought to you by Event Footprints, the event consultancy that helps you to design events that are really engaging and measurable so you can actually prove their worth as well. And this is part of the part of the Best Foot Forward webinar series, which is all about better enabling event professionals to get great results from their events. And we want to see you engaging with this. It's great to see some chat already. We've got folks from Bulgaria, New Jersey, a couple from the UK as well. So let us know where you're joining us from, and please use the emojis because that helps us to get a little insight into where your head's at as well. And we're going to be covering a few different bits and pieces today, hopefully giving you a few small, but I hope powerful triggers to help tap into attendee psychology and ultimately get even more engagement at your events. And we are joined today by some absolute stalwarts of psychology. It's in their blood, I think you could say, and we're covering some pretty wide-ranging geographies as well here. So whilst these folks introduce themselves, please can you also introduce yourselves to us just a little bit by giving us an idea as to how much you're familiar with using behavioural science to shape event design. So first person I'm going to ask to introduce themselves. It's 7 a.m. in the morning for her. The sun hopefully will be rising in that window behind her during the course of the webinar today. Victoria Matey, it's absolutely fantastic to have you here today. Please could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you so much, Vanessa, and it's such a pleasure to be here today, and thank you everyone for joining. I'm Victoria Matey. I'm an event psychology advisor, and I help event organizers, event industry partners, event owners to apply insights from behavioral science, psychology, and neuroscience to event design and event marketing.
So not much at all, Victoria. A lovely message in the chat that says, I love Victoria, she's amazing, which is glorious to see. So keep these positive comments coming. It's good for our own psychology. And Rob, please, can you introduce yourself too?
Yes, hello everyone. My name's Rob Curtis. I'm the founder of Event Footprints. As Vanessa said at the start, we're an event technology consultancy helping brands and agencies measure the impact of live events through technology. And I was very keen to get Victoria on our Best Foot Forward series. I was fortunate enough to study psychology for my degree. I absolutely loved it. Ended up with a career in live events. And so when I came across Victoria through LinkedIn, I was just like, how it's amazing that someone has merged two of my passions in terms of psychology and live events. And so very keen to get her on for our second in the series.
Well, I'm going to make you feel really self-conscious now, Victoria. There's a little Victoria loving going on over in the chat about who loves you more.
I'm going to screenshot that, you know.
That's a good idea. So there are quite a lot of subjects that we want to cover today. And I really will say that preparing for this has been one of the more dynamic webinar preparation run-ups, I think, and I hope you'll both agree with me on that, because sometimes we weren't approaching things from the same angle always, and I think it's quite important to share that with the audience, that this is, in my opinion, still quite a fresh, quite an unexplored part of the event world. And in a minute, we'll get the poll results up to see what you told us about yourselves. But the fact that we all had slightly different views, approaches, and sometimes a little bit conflicting as well, in a healthy way, of course, we're all very polite with it, I think tells us that there's a lot of conversation that needs to be had here and a lot of learnings to be had as well. So if we could get the poll results shared to all, that would be wonderful, and we can have a quick peek and see what what we've learned about our audience members. And I'm going to have to see if I look in the right place for this, or if that's possible to do. Can we get the poll results? Maybe not. Let me know if we can. Either way, we'll keep heading on. Oh, here we go. There we are. So, okay, well, that sums it all up. Do some quick maths. 72%, I think that is. 72%, 73%, telling us that they are really early stage with this, and then the 24% have just started to touch on it, and very, very small amount of folks that are really building this in as standard. Anything surprising about those stats for either of you? I would say, actually, if I'm honest, I think I maybe thought there might be a few more in the moderately category, but what do you guys think?
I'm not surprised. I think that actually is pretty accurate and is reflecting what I see when I talk to the event organizers. A lot of people really do not know about event psychology approach, or they heard about it but they do not really practice it. So yeah. Not surprised. How about you, Rob?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, case in point why we wanted to get Victoria on today, because actually there's not many people in the world that specialize in this area. And I think certainly when it comes to live events, it's that human nature and how these people engage at events, and the science back behind it, which I think is really, really powerful. But again, no one knows what they don't know, right? Which is hopefully what we're going to learn a bit more about today.
Yeah, and there's a comment actually, Michelle from BCD, reflecting that too. It makes sense for this to be a higher, for more people to be scoring moderately or highly, but it's still quite a new concept. So I'm going to go straight in with quite a pertinent question, I think. Victoria, why is this? Okay, and I will break that question down a little bit. We're kind of all sitting here saying this makes sense. That's the exact phrase in the chat as well. It makes sense for this to be higher. But why are companies not doing this? And one of the things I really remember you saying in the prep is that you see some resistance and reluctance. I think the phrase was actually reluctance you used. So why is that? What is not connecting? And also, what are the barriers that are stopping folks from actually implementing this sort of approach to event design?
Yes, I mean, I love that we are talking about this, and I think reluctance is sort of a consequence. It's the result, and the real reasons, they lie in the human psychology area, So generally speaking, and this applies to anything, including why not all events yet are doing the psychology-driven event design. So generally speaking, we should look at whether people have enough capacity, that is skills and knowledge to do something, whether they have enough opportunity, that is resources available to them to do specific behavior, right? And whether they have enough motivation to do it. And so when we have all these three factors coming together, that's when we see specific behavior performing, right? And so specific action being done. And so, and on top of that, actually, we have a lot of hidden factors like emotions and habits, right? And it all plays a certain role. So in this context, I see there are barriers, for why people in events do not really practice it yet. For example, they don't know what it is about, so they do not have capacity, the knowledge, right? Or they lack resources. That is, they lack the opportunity, like they don't have an expert or chief behavioral officer in their team to lead the way, right? Or they do not have enough motivation, so they want to keep the status quo, for example, because they don't see why they need to change, right? And this is why actually, so I mean, again, they need to have capacity, opportunity, and motivation to be able to practice the approach. And this is why I'm not just talking about it or, provide information to the organizers. I also provide resources so that it's easier for them to start out with the approach, or it's easier for them to persuade their team to try new ways, right? And of course, that's why I practice this approach and assist others in applying event psychology solutions.
So you're helping to remove some of those barriers by providing what you provide. But of those three headline areas that you mentioned there, is there one that stands out more than others as being the greatest barrier? Is it motivation? Is it knowledge? Is it capacity?
No, not really. I mean, and this is actually the framework from behavioral science. So again, this applies to any behavior we want to see. So there should be three factors at play simultaneously for the change to happen. So people should have knowledge, they should have resources, and they should have motivation. And that's when when magic happens,
Okay. So that's for the event teams themselves, and we've got to somehow translate that into what's available to the attendees for them to be able to make the decisions that we kind of want them to be making. Rob, is there anything you would add on to what you feel the barriers are that stops organisations getting stuck into this approach to design?
I think it's people don't know what they don't know. So I think that's what it boils down to. And I think, it makes perfect sense that, us as humans, we need to make, events are very impactful, and we need to make sure we're designing those events to support us as humans and our human nature. I think it's the science that backs up what that event design looks like. And again, it's around people just don't know what they don't know, which is why we brought Victoria on today.
I'm just going to ask a question. Someone's popped in the chat that I am muffled. If you're hearing muffled version of me as well, please can you let us know? And I'm not sure what I'll do about it, but I will try and do something about it if others are having the same challenge. So, Rob, let's continue with you. And let's get into event design, particularly, and thinking about the psychological principles. Okay, good. Sounds like I'm back from being unmuffled, which is excellent. Let's hope it stays that way. Rob, what do you think is the most overlooked principle that could have a really big impact on event success? So what's being overlooked most frequently?
I think it's the that link to us as humans. So when I go to events personally, I want to connect with people, I want to contribute, I want to learn something new, and I want to make it memorable. So I think it's those sort of four factors, which I think, certainly from my own perspective, when I go to these events, is I feel that I've got a lot of value from that, and I've been engaged in that whole experience. So I think one thing I always, when I say to talk to people, is around design the events and the experience in a way that is memorable, but also that is aligns to those sort of human needs around wanting to connect with like-minded people, wanting to grow and learn, and to contribute as well, to share your opinions and to be able to impart your knowledge in what other people are thinking or queries that they might have. I think it's incredibly powerful to be able to do that.
That's a very good point, and also something which, I'm going to slightly show my age here, 20 years ago in events wasn't really considered as important. It was more of a go and listen and learn from the people on stage, and that was kind of all that was really expected. So that is quite a significant shift, and I'm sure very much to do with the age of social media that we live in, where we all can contribute very openly and easily on anything, which is also perhaps another subject matter. Victoria, what do you feel is the most overlooked principle or psychological principle that event organisers aren't grabbing hold of yet?
Yeah, I think we really should look at events from a human-centered perspective first. And what I mean by that is that I think successful experiences are not about big attendance numbers or big sales numbers. That's successful event business, right? And successful experiences are about whether people feel like it's worth their time, like Rob says, right? There is a value, and whether they intentionally choose to attend because, you know, it helps them grow, it empowers them, it brings joy or a sense of purpose, right? And those are less intangible metrics, right? But I think those events that do that and they do help people grow and bring joy and meaning, right? They don't really need to market themselves too much, right? They sell out because they fulfill people's needs. And I think understanding these needs, first of all, and, you know, in general, knowing about those universal, basic, fundamental human needs, and also understanding what the primary needs for your specific audience are, this is what will help you make a big impact. And I think there are specific practical strategies based on psychology and behavioral science, and I can touch on a few in a moment. But I think the first thing to consider are those basic universal needs, what people value, and we usually take care of physical needs, right? In events like food, water, safety, rest,
Wi-Fi.
increasingly. Sorry.
Wi-Fi.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, right? And we are only now starting to look at psychological needs like progress, connection, clarity, fun, belonging, acceptance, you know, creativity, beauty, love. I mean, those are, you know, basic, again, universal human needs. And this has specific implications. For example, what might be the way to meet such needs as acceptance and connection? What is the way? I mean, a simple conversation, right? A simple conversation. We know from research that conversations have significant positive impact on physical health, on mental health, on social connectedness, right? And when we understand that, we can go and create specific formats, right? We can put conversations at the center of event design. So we can think of, specific practical ways to do that, right? For example, for the organizers, they can add conversation-based formats to the event program. And if it's a trade show, they can swap out tasks that actually create a barrier with the audience and instead have sofas to make conversations more comfortable, to actually nudge for conversations, right? So practical strategies come from understanding what the values are and what basic human needs are.
Cool. I absolutely love that the word love has made it into this conversation. So some of the things I want to recap, some of the things that both of you said there, which were contribution, growth, joy. I'm sure I've missed some, but purpose, progress, fun, belonging, acceptance, love made it in there as well. Because I don't think very often, no, there will be cases where this does happen, but I don't think very often an event team sitting down to prepare their intentions and design for their event go through many, if any, of those human needs. We're very focused on so many other metrics, which are very important. And I'm not going to suggest that any of the metrics we focus on aren't important, but we don't really think about these in great deal of detail. And I have a follow-up question as well, which is for something like progress or growth, for example. I feel like they are, certainly in a business event environment, which I think is what we're really talking about today, we're very often mindful of that at least, but how do we communicate that to our attendees to make sure that they have sort of made the mental association that what they have experienced does contribute to their growth? Or is it something that should be so obvious they just get it? How much do we need to tell them that these things are happening, and how do we communicate that? Or should it just be so abundantly obvious that we don't need to go to the effort to make sure they've registered that they've experienced growth or progress? Just taking those two examples. Any thoughts on that? Victoria, I'm going to be mean and pick on you first.
Yeah. I'm thinking that it shouldn't be hidden. I think you should actually nudge it through small details, because people are in their own bubbles, right? They don't really think about experience sort of explicitly, right? So they don't think, oh, I should go and engage. They just do something, right? And they don't think, oh, this is going to be fulfilling my need for progress, or for growth. They just attend because they have their own motivations. And of course, it's not really possible to tap into individual motivation or individual ideas and thoughts at the moment they make a decision about attending an event and engaging. But again, if we can execute some small details here and there that indicate that this is for them, that this is the experience that they need to, again, progress and grow, then people kind of pick up those signals. Again, not consciously, but subconsciously, I think.
Yeah. So
I don't know if, sort of
nudges.
little details, little nudges that, kind of show them that you care.
Yeah, Rob, what are you thinking? I can see the cogs are turning.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think some of the events that we're working on, there's a component where you go to these content sessions and it's tracked and it's measurable, so that you then receive your CPD points, and that's to help obviously further your career development in a product or a service as it might be. But I also think that we go to events and you might see the speaker list, and there's going to be people in there which are going to be thought leaders in their field and space, which might not necessarily be about learning around something to do with your career, but it might be something that you're learning around humanity as a whole, or and I always think to myself, someone once told me that when you leave an event and you go home to your loved ones or whatever and have dinner, what is the thing that you would remember and talk about over dinner? It's probably not going to be the certification you got because you had sat in a technical session. It's probably going to be that you heard a keynote speaker talk about how they've overcome a life challenge, for example. So,
someone you met.
Someone you met, or someone you met, exactly, or had a conversation with. I remember once. I was fortunate enough to go to an event called C2 in Montreal, who many people may have heard of on this webinar. And this was back in 2019, and at the time we used there's a platform called Brain Dates, and for people who don't know what that is, it's a peer-to-peer learning tool. So it's used at events, and it's an opportunity for peer-to-peer conversations and learning. And I sat in this Brain Dates meeting with the head of AI from IBM, and it blew me away. And so to be able to have that sort of conversation with somebody that was well out of my community or social circle, it just blew my mind. And that was, for me, the talking point when I got home to my family, is I just sat next to this guy that was head of AI at IBM. And so, I think it's so there's two parts to it. I think there's the technical learnings around the developing ourselves, but there's also the broader learning piece as well.
I would also argue that the things that make people want to return to an event are the things you're talking about there, Rob. The things that they told their other halves about when they got home. They told their friends when they got home. It's not I got my CPD points.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit on CPD, but
Yeah.
it's more likely to be those emotional things that make them want to return to the event. Couple of things have come up in the chat. Brain dates, where can I find out more? I'm going to ask, maybe Eliza could put a link to them in the chat, because they have a great partnership with Event Footprints, and so I'm sure that's great to do. Grant really wants to go to C2, don't we all, Grant? Absolutely. And then there's a really great message that I just want to put, Victoria and Rob, on your radar, because I think we'll try and come back to this. This is from I'm going to say Jean, and I apologise if it's Gian, but I'm going to go with Jean. Very honest, candid sharing here. So thank you for this, where she is working on an event where human connection is actually really important and fostering this sense of belonging, but she's getting a lot of pushback on proving that this contributes to a company goal, numbers and data that prove it will add value to the company. And I feel like, Rob, that's something you're probably going to be quite passionate about, because you're all about proving ROI on these sorts of initiatives. And maybe we'll come back to that one a little bit later on. But thank you very much for sharing that real example, because hopefully we'll squeeze a bit of time in to try and come back and discuss around that as well. We're going to ask you guys, the audience, a little question now, because we want to hear again a little bit more about you. We're going to have 2 polls in quite quick succession. So the first poll to push up, please, is: what do you think has the biggest impact on an attendee's decision to engage or not engage, I should probably add in there, at an event? Is it content speakers? Is it networking? Is it how personalized an experience is down at the bottom? I'm not going to read them all out to you, but please pick which one you feel has the greatest impact here. I find this one really hard to answer, and so I'm definitely curious to see what kind of results we get coming through here. And even coming up for the potential answers for this poll was quite challenging, because we had, I think, about 10 to start with, and we had to narrow it down quite a bit. Victoria, you're very passionate about personalisation. Whilst the poll results are coming through, do you want to just give us a little insight into your thinking when it comes to personalisation and tapping into the psychology of attendees?
Yeah, I think personalization, again, it's a result of understanding that people are, and this is one of the fundamental human behavior laws, people are self-oriented. When there is a research about this concept called the cocktail party effect. When we are at in a party, right, and it's noisy and we can barely hear each other, but then someone says your name and you immediately pick this up. Why? Because your name is super important to you, right? And so this just an illustration that people really like talking about themselves. They really like thinking about themselves. And whenever they have an opportunity to feel valued and recognized and acknowledged, their engagement increases, right? And so when we personalize experience, we help kind of actualize this, right? Bring this up to the surface, right? So people, again, do not consciously go and think about it, but whenever they have an opportunity to feel like, again, this recognition and acknowledgement through personalization of experience, their engagement increases immediately. So I think, again, understanding how it works. Oh, I see the poll results are up. Understanding how it works, again, just helps us think about creative ways to add personalization to the experience. And that impacts engagement.
Creative ways to add personalization to the experience. I feel like that's a good takeaway, because this isn't easy, is it? You have got to be creative with this. It's not... perhaps there's someone on the call who does think it's easy in the webinar, in which case share in the chat. But on the whole, I do think this is quite a challenging one, and it's come up about halfway on the list as well for which thing is most important. Content and speakers, almost equal on a par with atmosphere and environment. I put atmosphere and environment just for me, I always find that quite important. And I'm personally not someone, I'm probably going to get in trouble with someone for saying this, I don't always go to that many sessions at an event because I really like to speak to people and spend time talking and building more kind of one-to-one relationships. Depends what's sort of going on the stage, though, I will add. Rob, what are your thoughts on these results?
Yeah, it's I think event planners have got probably the hardest job now, because they have to design these experiences for everybody, right? And what we're starting to see in large scale sort of business events is this, to Victoria's point, is this, you can go to this event, and some of these are sort of 2, 3, 4 days in some instances, where you can literally personalize your whole on-site event journey. And the technology to do, is an enabler to help with that personalized, that on-site experience. So it's, you might go to an event because you want to learn, and you want to listen to keynote speakers or sit in, technical sessions. You might want to go to network just to meet. You might want to go to network to have meaningful conversations and do peer-to-peer learning. And I think, so that technology to support that personalization is key. But I think also, to the second point is actually why you're there. How do you create that atmosphere that supports that, all of those sort of self-guided on-site journey? And it's hard, right? It's not, to your point earlier, Vanessa, I think gone are the days where people will go to a conference and just sit and be talked to all day. Our attendees are expecting more because, again, people are time poor. They want to go to these events and they make sure that they get value. And therefore, as brands and agencies, we're having to enhance that whole experience to support that journey, that attendee journey.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I would just add, that we shouldn't do personalization for the sake of it, right? Because it's just trendy thing to do, right? But because it actually sparks specific emotions. Like I remember going to an event and I was about to enter the room for a new session, and the speaker came up to me and started talking to me and started like introducing me. He saw my name and he called me by name, and then he started introducing me to other attendees in the room. And I immediately felt like, that was all about me, but also that I'm becoming a part of this, environment of this specific session, of this specific group. And this is the way to personalize it, right? So I think, again, like I said, there might be some small but creative ways to introduce personalization in the event design.
That's a lovely example there. So small, so simple. And I think actually we were keen to make sure that there were some small, simple examples in here. And it isn't all just things that seem completely overwhelming. Victoria and Rob, we have 15 minutes left. We have so much more to cover. I had a feeling this might happen. We're going to have another poll now, and this is to help us understand a little bit more. This is our last poll, actually, a little bit more about your biggest challenges, viewers, when it comes to measuring attendee engagement, because we're talking about attendee engagement as if we actually do this really as if it's easy to measure. It's really not. It's an incredibly hard thing, and even when you have done a great job on attendee engagement, it's sometimes incredibly difficult to know how good a job you have or haven't done, and how you can prove that to stakeholders that maybe are assessing the performance of your events as well. So if we could push the third and final poll live, what do you have as your biggest challenges when it comes to measuring attendee engagement? And take a little look and pick the one that feels most relevant to you. And Victoria, there's been a message in the chat whilst folks are answering their poll choice that this is from Michelle again at BCD. We pack agendas out and leave no downtime. And I remember when we were having the prep sessions, this was something you mentioned. I've forgotten the phrase you used, but it was something to do with overwhelm, or where your brain just is completely oversaturated. Can you give us a little insight into your opinion on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is one of the things that I keep repeating every time I'm talking about, some practical strategies. So making things simple is the major thing to do when you practice the event psychology approach, because it is based on a law that people are wired to avoid cognitive effort. I like to say people are cognitive misers. That is, our brains are wired to save energy for more important tasks like keeping our bodies alive. And so that's why we are wired to avoid cognitive effort as much as possible. And some estimates say that we make 35,000 decisions a day. So it's just an insane number. And obviously, we cannot really think over each of those decisions, right? So instead, our brains, in many ways and in many cases, go on autopilot. So when you want people to do something, make it easy and make it simple. And that refers to, not packing the agenda because they will be overwhelmed with information. That refers to making signage clear and easy so that people are not confused. That refers to shorten registration forms or survey forms, because again, that will, if you don't do that, that will overwhelm them and affect their decision to fill it in, for example, right, or to register. So making things simple is the major thing to do. And audit your event and audit the event attendee journey and see where you can simplify things.
Thank you, Victoria. Great comment in the chat as well. Andrew from Spa Life Events, they've reduced the presentations to 20 minutes. That has had a really profoundly positive. Love it. Again, so simple.
That's a great example, yeah.
So simple. And here we go. So defining meaningful engagement metrics. Rob, I'm going to come to you with my next question then, because I think that if I'm honest, I didn't think that one was going to come out on top. But this measuring engagement is generally considered to be quite intangible. So what are best practices when it comes to measuring this? What can people actually start to do? We've lost him altogether. He'll come back in a minute.
Yeah.
So I had a feeling that might be about to happen. Victoria, then, in the meantime, your thoughts on the same question. How do we actually start to make this more measurable? How do we define what engagement metrics should be?
Yeah, I think one thing that I want to mention when it comes to engagement is what engagement is and what actually are we measuring with engagement. Because, people, let's say an attendee registered for a webinar, right? That's an engagement, right? They kind of decided to do it. But then whether they will attend or not, and if they do attend, that's another level of engagement, right? But then we should see whether or not they are participating within that event, whether they ask questions, whether they somehow engage in other ways, right? So that's the next level of engagement. And then also whether they do something after the event as a result of attending, that's even higher level of engagement, right? And so at each level, we can measure it somehow, I think. And another note that I kind of want to say here, maybe it's a side note, but I think that engagement doesn't start when someone walks into an event. It starts before the event, and it should continue after the event, right?
Yeah.
And we should always remember that it's not something that starts at the event. And when we create event design with this in mind, this will naturally impact overall satisfaction, not to mention how much people will remember and how many and stronger connections can be made, right? And so when it comes to, how we measure that, I think there are ways that are still being overlooked for example, observation. I don't see it happening very often at events. And I remember who is the behavioral scientist. He said once that as a business, you want to get to the truth about behavior, but for that, you need data based on observed actual and not claimed behavior. Right. So, and I think he's not the only one. Behavioral scientists have been pointing out that businesses rely too heavily on self-reported data, meaning, surveys and things like that. And I actually talked about that with another behavioral scientist, Bree Williams, on one of my podcasts, and she said that it's kind of compelling to hear directly from your customers, from your audience, because we think that what they're saying is true. And it's not that they are lying, but they are impacted by various biases, by false memories. And so we really do not get the real picture when we ask them directly. And this is why we need to look at it from the behavioral perspective and apply behavioral science to event design, because it shows us how people are wired and what they actually need, and what we can do to improve engagement.
Love so much of what you said there, Victoria. When you're talking about pre-event engagement, or engagement starts pre-event, there was an emoji flurry at that point. There's also a comment in the chat around post-event strategy being really crucial for engagement as well. And you said, of course, does someone engage enough to then do something after an event? So I think you're echoing that too. But how we validate real experiences as opposed to what we're told, that feels quite challenging, if I'm very honest. And the chat's brilliant. Keep it coming. Rob, best chat comment, which is Rob's become a Dalek. We're very pleased to have the human version of you back. And I know you've missed a tiny bit there, but all things you will have heard, I think, really in the prep conversation. So question for you, Rob, now I got you back. Can you give a real life example where event engagement did happen and it was verifiable through data? There were some sort of metrics, measurements that verified that attendee engagement was real.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I probably cut out just as I was giving my spiel, and what I was saying, I don't know if the listeners caught what I was saying, but it's looking at the technology and the data that we can get out of it. So there is so much data in these platforms across, from the moment somebody gets an invitation or a save the date for to go to an event, for the moment they arrive on site, to the moment they interact in the session, download the app. There is so much data, and what we spend a lot of time with is helping all brands and organizations look at that, what data is available to them, and then how that is then visualized in a single view dashboard, in effect. So there are organizations that might have multiple different technologies across the whole tech stack, the registration system, a different app provider, different live polling Q&A, different badging provider, and all of those data points are siloed. They're all capturing brilliant data that can measure engagement. How do you all bring it all together and to prove that event engagement, not only for yourselves, but also to your senior stakeholders as well? And that would be things like, how many connections were made at the event. So many people will know on the call, we work with the Click Smart badge, where people can just click and connect together. That's all captured as a measurement of connections and networking. We talked a little bit about the Brain Dates platform, where that peer-to-peer learning taking place, and the quality of those meetings, I think, is really, really important. So yeah, all of these platforms have these data sets, and it's about understanding what is available and then how to visualize it in a single view dashboard.
There's a comment from Zadia in the chat as well that says similar sorts of things. Most modern event tech can measure engagement and fundamentally, the summary is make this easy. I love Zadia's enthusiasm. I probably wouldn't use the word easy, but achievable, maybe at least. And Rob, to continue that, and I think this links in with the real life use case challenge actually that Jean shared with us, that she's been getting some pushback on fostering human connection being an important metric. How do you communicate some of these metrics up, these attendee engagement, attendee experience metrics up, in a way that resonate, that engage, that are meaningful to the higher powers in an organisation who maybe have never run an event in their lives? They're just looking to see, was this event worth the 100 grand we spent on it, or the 10 grand we spent on it? It doesn't really matter how much, but was it worth it? How do you do that?
So we've kind of developed a 4-pillar methodology around event ROI as a broader term. So looking at the technology that measures brand value, metrics that can capture brand value and what our attendees think about us as a brand. Looking at the metrics that measure attendee value, which is kind of what we're talking about today, and how we want them to feel as part of coming to our event. The event execution part, which is obviously very important from an ops perspective, but also that business value piece around, actually, if it's a client event, how much pounds and pence did that event generate for us? So those are our 4 key pillars that we help brands sort of measure against. But what we're talking about today is that attendee value piece, and that's how we want those attendees to feel, if you like, as a result of being with our event. So yeah, as I said, it's all around, I think, it's creating the experience first and foremost, because that's the number 1 priority, right? We want people to have a great experience and a memorable experience at our event. And then secondary to that is then we need to visualize that to our stakeholders to know that it was a brilliant investment in terms of our event design, but also it was a brilliant investment in terms of our technology deployment as well, because we can absolutely categorically show that our attendees got value from that event.
Thank you, Rob. There are so many questions and thoughts that are flying through my head from the chat, but I'm going to just ask Victoria one more question, and then we're going to pick up some of the audience questions. Victoria, if you had a room, well, it's kind of what you do have actually, I was about to say a room full of event organisers in front of you, you just can't see them because they're at home somewhere, what is one thing that they can do to better educate their internal teams to make some of these changes, and ideally something that's a reasonably low cost psychological tweak?
Right. Well, I think, first of all, I would say that if you're just starting out with the approach and you have some resistance, do something small, something very simple, so that you can persuade others, so that they can see the results and kind of get on board with you easier, right? So that when you experiment with something huge, there are huge risks involved, right? But when you introduce some small tweak and then it works, and then they see how, how it can be applied in, next time, they will be more willing to try new ideas. And for one simple low cost tweak, I would suggest this. Humans have a natural sort of desire or natural inclination to add rather than subtract. And when we are faced with some specific challenge like boosting engagement, right, we tend to add on more activities than removing things from the design. And that leads to overpacked schedule, sensory overload, and that actually affects engagement. It results in low engagement and poor satisfaction. But if you remove something, and that is a nice habit to have, then you can have different results. For example, you can shorten session times, right? You can send fewer messages, but if you send them at the right time, when your audience is more receptive, they might be more effective. Your messaging, your communication might be more effective. You can get rid of poorly worded and unnecessary survey questions, because I usually see like long survey forms with so many unnecessary questions, right? Like asking, would you attend next year, right? It's completely wasted opportunity. And from a personal perspective, I would recommend you slow down to become more productive. And this is actually a research-based tip, because recent latest research shows that when we slow down, again, when we remove, activities from our schedule, it positively influences our productivity. And there is a new book, by the way, that just has been launched, released by Cal Newport, behavioral scientist. It's called Slow Productivity. I haven't read it yet, but I've heard a lot of good things about it. So I would recommend you check it out. So I guess, my tip would be, my recommendation would be to remove things, to subtract rather than add.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Rob, I'm not going to let you answer. I'm really sorry, but we've got to get to some attendee questions. I'm so sorry, but I'll capture it in your brain and we can put it into one of the follow-up emails. Sorry. So quite a few different questions that have come through, and I'm going to go firstly with this one around networking, which is how can planners encourage more spontaneous networking? So one of the questions ones we've come back to is around connectivity. I think this probably links into contribution a little bit as well. So how can we get them to do this? Rob, you can go first this time.
I think it's about breaking down. You want to make, when you go to an event, you want to connect to the right people, right? The people that are going to be meaningful to you. And it's almost like, how do you get over the small talk to find out, actually, have you got something in common? Have you got something that a shared interest that you can talk about? And I think that's where technology can be really powerful in terms of, prioritizing people that you should speak to in the app, for example, based on your interests in the way that you've sort of set up your registration flow. So almost like having a predefined list of people that you should speak to because they have common interests. Similarly, then on site, then how do you then facilitate those connections? And again, we work with the Click Smart badge, but one of useful way is to have some kind of notification on the badge that says, actually, I probably should speak to this person because they have a similar interest to me, and therefore we're going to light them up the same color. Okay, so there's things that you can do around the technology, both from a pre-event registration app perspective, to support those, making sure you make the right connections, and making them sure that they're meaningful, and just move that small talk there. Just get straight in there and talk about that shared interest.
And I guess also just allow them time for it. And I think that's one of the things we're saying on the whole. We don't really leave enough time to do that properly. I've got a question now for, Victoria. And this is from Adam Filleri, who I know, we probably all know. If there was one thing you could provide an event organizer and an event attendee, if they were in the same room, what would you ask them to work on together?
Would I ask you what? Sorry.
What would you ask them to work on together? So if you've got, I think to just paraphrase it down, you've got an event organizer and an event attendee, they're in a room together, what would you ask them to address?
Gosh, this is a difficult question. What would I ask them? I don't have an answer to this like immediately, but one thing that I want to say, when there is an organizer and an attendee in the same room, I think we often assume that organizers take the full responsibility for what's happening, at the event, and we rarely share that responsibility with the attendees. And I think we should do that more, because it's a two-way street. if attendees want to get max out of attending the event, they should do their part of job. And our responsibility as organizers is to actually let them know what kind of things they should do before the event, to prepare for it, to prepare for, connections to happen on site, to prepare for learning to be more effective and all that kind of things. Because really, there are so many things that organizers should do, again, from the psychological perspective as well, to make sure that learning and networking and inspiration are happening at the event. But it's also a responsibility of a specific individual attending the event.
Yeah. Okay,
I know it doesn't answer the question, but
Rob, what do you think?
So it's kind of the point I was going to make just a minute ago. And I think from my personal perspective, like we've all run we've all put on brilliant events, but we've also attended them as well. And I think it's worth just sitting down and analysing those events that you've attended, and why were they so good, and just sitting and having that conversation, and just thinking about how it made you feel as an individual. And why that was around all the things we've discussed, and taking that information back and then applying it into the way you design events. Again, for me, one of a utopia moment, shall we say, is when I attended C2.
Oh no, not Dalek Rob again.
It just blew my mind, and I think.
I think we've lost him. Oh no, he's back. Rob, I think we heard you. C2 was a pinnacle moment that really was formative is in your event intentions and design planning. We're going to wrap up. We are right on time and we will remain on time. Thank you so much for joining us today. Once again, this is part of the Best Foot Forward webinar series brought to you from Event Footprints. There will be more. You will receive the updates and there will be a recording of this available on demand. Victoria, thank you so much. Absolutely brilliant contributions. Rob, thank you also. But a virtual round of applause for both of you, and Victoria, thanks again.
Thank you so much.